Being here in America doesn't make you an American. Being born here in America doesn't make you an American. Why, if birth made you American, you wouldn't need any legislation. You wouldn't need any amendments to the Constitution. No, I'm not an American. I'm one of the 22 million black people who are the victims of Americanism. One of the 22 million black people who are the victims of democracy. Nothing but disguised hypocrisy. And I see America through the eyes of a victim. I don't see any American dream. I see an American nightmare.
I have a dream. My poor little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
I must confess that that dream that I had that day has at many points turned into a nightmare. Now, I'm not one to lose hope. I keep on hoping. I still have faith in the future. But I've had to analyze many things over the last few years, and I would say over the last few months. I've gone through a lot of soul-searching and agonizing moments, and I've come to see that we have many more difficult days ahead, and some of the old optimism was a little superficial, and now it must be tempered with a solid realism.
Brother Malcolm, I have to admit that as I've regarded the last years of our struggle, my dream has morphed into a nightmare. I still have hope. That's the basis of my faith. If you ever run into a minister who's lost hope, you better get away from him as fast as you can. But there are certain practical matters. For example, I thought our struggle in the South was just super challenging. But I came up to Chicago, and I found out that the racism in the North is even uglier than it is in the South. It's as brutal and as violent. And practically speaking, even with legislation that has been passed, civil rights bills, voting rights bills, huge attention that's been paid to the struggle of people of Africans and black people, Negroes, the level of hatred, vitriol, xenophobia in America is beyond anything that I imagined. Anything that I imagined when I was having the dream. And so, your reference to a nightmare may be more real than people even imagine.
Dr. King, and I know I've said some things about you that you may not agree with.
I'm a forgiving person.
And I depend on that. But let me ask you, I find myself walking from Harlem down to the middle of Manhattan, and even though we're supposed to be a cosmopolitan city, the issues that we faced back then, I think we're still facing them today, and it seems as though there's been a reemergence. I had a revelation. I went to Mecca, and when I returned, I realized that some of the things that I'd said about some of my white brothers and sisters was not how I should be speaking and seeing them. But I still think that that check that was written, and you've spoken about this, has come up with insufficient funds. And based on that, Dr. King, I'm just not quite sure that we can have hope this day. I'm not sure.
Well, your uncertainty is understandable, but as I mentioned, James Weldon Johnson wrote when Hope Unborn had died, that we didn't have a voting rights bill then. We didn't have a civil rights bill then. We did not have people elected to office in the Deep South as mayors and congresspersons. So some deposits have been made. That's why I remain hopeful. And I think that we must recognize that, practically speaking, and as you indicated, we have allies. We have men and women who dare to dream with me. They see the reality of a creeping nightmare, but we keep hope alive. That's what my young student used to say. We keep hope alive. And in the midst of the struggle, we struggle on. It may be ugly, it may be violent, but we struggle on. And I believe that a change is going to come.
What did you say, Malcolm? Well, I said the same thing that everybody says, that his assassination was the result of the climate of hate. But only I said the chickens came home to roost, and which means the same thing. Climate of hate means that this is the result of something. And when I said chickens coming home to roost, I said the same thing.
Don't let anybody make you think that God chose America as his divine messianic force to be a sort of policeman of the whole world. God has a way of standing before the nations with judgment, and it seems that I can hear God saying to America, you are too arrogant. If you don't change your ways, I will rise up and break the backbone of your power, and I'll place it in the hands of a nation that doesn't even know my name. Be still and know that I'm God.
Dr. King, when I said that the chickens would come home to roost, I was really speaking about the fact that there was no respect. Not for the black man, nor anybody else in this country that would stand up for the black man. And when they took that President Kennedy out of the picture, I really understood that my prophecy had come to light. But let me ask you this, Dr. King, because at this point in time, as we are looking now into what we're seeing going on in America, many of the things that you struggled for, that I fought for, have gone backwards. I really want to know what your thoughts are with regard to where we are today. As we're looking at this with the history that has come before, and where we go tomorrow.
Once again, Minister Malcolm, I have to point you to the fact that our struggles have not been in vain. That we made great strides, even in the midst of God's judgment being on this nation. However, our prophecy is coming to pass. In other words, from the Voting Rights Act, or the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, to the sharp increase in the numbers of African American mayors, the sharp increase in the numbers in the Congress, the sharp increase in the number of elected officials to state legislatures. We have seen that many people of color, of African descent, and women, and Latinos, and Jews, you know, as a result of our working together, marching together, we've seen quotas against Jewish persons taken away. We've seen women ascend to offices and positions they had held. We've seen women, men, and others ascend to black men ascend to leadership of American corporations. Now, I have some difficulty with that, but I just want to show you the progress by. We've even seen, Minister Malcolm, 1 million black men march on Washington, D.C. And Minister Malcolm, as a result of that and other things, we have seen an African American elected as President of the United States. Now, I want to point out, Mr. Malcolm, that as a result of this, the truth of your statement, the arrogance of America that I referred to has not been able to deal with the progress of a diverse population in this nation and has responded to the forward progress in its arrogance with what we see as the leader of this nation today. And that in itself, because of what I think those who have been largely responsible for elevating this person to leadership will have to endure. And then they will understand chickens coming home to roost.
Well, you know, I've said that we need to obtain our freedom by any means necessary. And I've been misquoted many times on that because it includes the type of advocacy that you have engaged in. It also includes pushing back against those who raise a hand to me. But let me say this, Dr. King, with regard to the questions that abound these days in that United States that has in its own name a oxymoron. That's something I learned on the streets of Roxbury. That I am a Muslim. You are a Christian. My religion teaches me that peace and justice is right. I know you believe the same thing. But there are people who look like you and who look like me and have a darker hue to their skin that stand now in America as though they're on trial for being one of God's children. How do you reckon that, Dr. King? How do you reckon that?
Well, Brother Malcolm, I borrow your words because they don't hate me because I'm a Christian. They don't hate you because you're a Muslim. They don't hate me because I'm Democrat or Republican. They don't hate you because you live up north or down south. They hate us because we're black. America's DNA, the greatness of this nation, was built on racism. And it was built on greed. And the exploitation of people of color has been at the very root of what has made this great nation, great. Many people have come from different places to America and have done well. But the very foundation of the wealth that made opportunity possible was built on the exploitation of people of color. And it was built, and we tend to forget this, and I pray that God will forgive us all, but on the native people who were here when that fellow called Columbus claimed to have discovered something. There were people who were here, and they have been pushed. I read something, Brother Malcolm. I was traveling, doing some heavenly traveling, and I ran across a book about the Osage Nation. Yes. And how the so-called Indians were killed in order to destroy their economic system. That happened around the same time in that Tulsa, Oklahoma area when they burned down the Black Wall Street. These things are constant reminders of the racism and the materialism that has gripped the soul of this nation. And I must confess that that's one of the things that at least has me sitting up here in heaven talking to you. Because it was not so much race, which is extremely important, but it was the blatant greed of this nation that caused us not only to exploit people of color, but also to use our greed to destroy lands outside of the United States, to send our young sons and daughters off to die in wars that were designed to protect the economic structure of this nation. Unjust, immoral, greedy. And Brother Malcolm, you know, we to tell you why hope is so important, we pulled together, and why racism is such an ugly lie, whites, Jewish persons, Muslims, Christians, we pulled together Latinos. Different movements were sparked from what we did. But early on, we started marching up the Poor People's Campaign. And the organizing of the sanitation workers in Tennessee. Those things frightened America more than anything else. And unfortunately, as a result, I'm sitting here talking to you. You left a little earlier than I did, but here we are.
That concern about America and the multifaceted aspects, this kind of octopus with so many tentacles that reach so deep into the issues of race and class and being intermingled. How does America untangle that? Let me ask you, have you thought about the fact that the intent to build the country on the back of stolen people who became chattel was intended to be consistent even at the time of what they called Reconstruction?
Oh, we are at Reconstruction. We have to recognize that by then, the American system was firmly in place. They fought like hell to keep it in place. And when I was talking about the judgment of God, it was almost as if whoever penned those lines, mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord, trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. God's truth was marching on. Thousands were killed in that war. That was an act of God. That was an act of God. Thousands were killed. The country was divided, and it took God working through a man who himself was not convinced that we should be free or that we were equal to anybody else, but working through him to start the freedom movement going in terms of legislation and executive orders.
Dr. King, we can't legislate people's hearts.
No, Brother Malcolm, unfortunately we can't. And that's why you and I are sitting here talking about it right now, because we must always remember the wages of the prophets.
Before the victory is won, some may even have to face physical death. We must come to see that there are some things so eternally true that they are worth dying for, and if a man has not discovered something that he will die for, he isn't fit to live.
I read once, passingly, about a man named Shakespeare. I only read about him passingly, but I remember one thing he wrote that kind of moved me. He put it in the mouth of Hamlet, I think it was, who said, "To be or not to be." He was in doubt about something. Whether it was nobler in the mind of man to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, moderation, or to take up arms against the sea of troubles and by opposing, end them. And I go for that. If you take up arms, you'll end it. But if you sit around and wait for the one who's in power to make up his mind that he should end it, you'll be waiting a long time.
Change the miserable condition. I want to change the miserable condition. We both have been struggling to change the miserable condition of the majority of the people on this earth. See, one thing I'm sure of, one thing that has helped me when I evolved in my own focus from just people of African descent to a kind of understanding of the world struggle. You will know this because of your trip to Mecca and what you discovered. And is that we were talking to poor people. That's the majority of people in the world. We look good, you know, we dress up, but most of us are poor. And in the United States of America, before I made my migration here, blacks, poor whites began to listen right now. They joined me in the Poor People's Campaign. Coming out of Louisiana, South Carolina, and Florida, those poor whites were struggling down there. And they heard the voice of heaven speak to them. And they recognized that their government was denying them resources and shipping them over. One of the greatest ambassadors that you recruited was Muhammad Ali. And he made it clear to black people, he said, no Vietnamese ever called me the N-word. And everybody said, oh, that's right. Why are we killing those brown people over there? But I think we've got to realize, Brother Brown, that our struggle is one that's going to cost us the ultimate sacrifice. And it's not unique to us. You paid that price. So did you. It's not unique to us. I can think, the one thing you can say about the civil rights movement, the nonviolent direct action, was that it was anything but nonviolent. Look at who lost their lives. A Catholic lay woman named Viola Leaves. Two young Jewish boys and an African American boy, Smyrna Goodman and Shane. For those of you who want to get out of the Abrahamic religion, look at James Reed, who was a Unitarian minister. Look at who was marching along the front line with Dr. King, carrying the Torah, Abraham Joshua. We have to take extreme action. As I look down now and see what's going on, you can see the arrogance and the striking back. Those who are just plain greedy and narrow-minded. Now they will argue, well, you know, we want a piece of the pie. We don't hate anybody, but they don't recognize. Like that woman, was a young white woman back in 18, I saw this with my heavenly vision now. 1848, she was playing a beautiful piano down in Charleston, South Carolina. It was a very expensive piano. All the keys were made of ivory. And never once did she think about how that ivory got to that point. The diamonds. Many people wear, but never once, living in the splendor of America, they think about how those diamonds came to be on their face. The oil that we pump into our automobiles. Very few people, until recently, I looked down and see, have been giving any consideration to how many lives are lost just to protect that oil. So, unfortunately, the day I had to take an extreme measure. It was at the Riverside Church. And I had to speak up, yes, even against America, and challenge one man who had been good. It's a big boy out of Texas. His name was Lyndon Johnson. He'd been good. He signed bills.
I saw you sit next to him as he signed that bill.
Yeah, he'd been good, but he was too wetty. And as I just heard myself say, I'm going to turn over this country to somebody who doesn't even know my name. Who doesn't believe in God?
Well, I can tell you that from where I'm seated right now, as I'm watching what's going on there, there appears to be a path that seems to be a track of no return. And as I were able to speak to all my people, all my followers down there, I would tell them that it's not just good enough to talk the talk. I would tell them that with regard to what America is selling right now and the misinformation and the alternative facts, that it's not something that we can chew on nor swallow. I would tell my people in the Muslim community that you don't need to stand alone on this, because I'm going to find somebody who's going to reach out a hand and stand with us. I'm going to make sure that we don't die with a deafening silence. I'm going to stand up, Dr. King. I would tell them to stand with whoever it is that's going to stand, because right now I see from where we are now, America is on a backslide. And that backslide is a dangerous thing, because anybody that knows history knows that all great civilizations end its golden age. And from there, there's oftentimes no return.
Yes, I imagine. But nobody knows the time or the hour. And while we still have the promise of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, while we still have the vision of a day when the lion and the lamb will lie down together, when the land will flow with milk and honey, when men will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks and study war no more. While we still have that hope, I believe that there are young men and women, Muslim, Christian, Jew, humanist. I believe that their voices are ringing out. Saw something about the Black Lives Movement. I saw something about young men and women, woman scurrying up a pole to take down a remnant of racism in America, the Confederate flag. I see men and women taking risks, even with their lives, in order to hold up these ideas. And so, you know, there's a certain irony. When one of our presidents sought to become King Richard of the United States, there was a descendant of slaves, a poor man. The only job he could get was as a security guard. The judgment of God, strange weapons. And he just happened to be walking through, was it Watergate? Found 2 pieces of tape on the door. And old King Richard met his demise. Now, many people would say, oh, that's just a small part of it. There had to be the testimonies and the trials. But yet and still, who would ever have thought that a young black man just doing his job would be responsible for saving America one more time? God bless you.
To come to the aid of their country. And I had to look up and find where that came from, because many of you have typed it in your typing classes. And I thought it might have been some great historian that said that, but actually it was the inventor of the typewriter. But on this day, as we are in this place, a place where African Americans at some point not too far distant would not have been able to come. We have a responsibility as racism does its work, and the people in this room go to support it in the year 2017 to make sure that we don't go backwards. We have a responsibility to understand that there were lives that were laid down. We have a responsibility to make sure that the work that needs to be done this day, is not one that is lost. So I'm urging you, before I pass it on to the preacher, I'm urging you on this day to not leave this place without a further pledge or a further commitment in your life to change what is going on in America institutionally and societally today. Dr. Bucks.
I want to thank Attorney Brewington for his friendship across the years. I've known him a long time. He is a very good attorney, and he's a very dear friend, he and his beloved wife. I also want to say a word of appreciation to the Islamic Center of Long Island. I work very closely with them. I think I'm on a board or two or something over there. And I want to say that I have really appreciated their friendship and support. It has come in many ways, ways that you may not even understand. I'll give you one example. I was here for one of their celebrations, and one of the members of the Islamic community gave a check that paid for Thanksgiving dinner for all who would come to the Abyssinian Church, just out of the show of solidarity. I want to thank the Hagedorn family. Amy Hagedorn was a big supporter of the CALL program that we have at the State University of Old Westbury. I worked with her in Sustain, Long Island, and she was a wonderful lady, a wonderful lady. And I felt Elaine Gross's tears, because when you come into a setting like Long Island and you find a friend like her, it makes all the difference in the world, Marge. You too. It makes all the difference in the world. I do want to say that I extended an invitation to this affair to Beauregard Jefferson Sessions. I want you to know that. Beauregard sent a reply that said, We wouldn't be here if it were not for Erase Racism. This dialogue would not have gone on. And so I concur with Attorney Brewington, my dear friend, that whatever we can do to support this organization, we should do. And I can't spend any money without talking to my wife. But I did put an envelope in my pocket. But for those of you who can make a contribution, I'm sure that it will be, and put it in that little bag on the table. I'm sure that it will be greatly appreciated. If you don't have your checkbook or whatever here tonight, you do what you do. Now, Sister Elizabeth, you know I'm a Baptist preacher. And so I got to try to raise money wherever I go. People hate to see me coming. They hate to see me coming. But with an audience like this, I can't miss my opportunity to help Elaine do this. In fact, a young boy over in Hicksville got a quarter stuck in his throat, and he was choking. And they called the doctor. The doctor said, I can't get it out. They called the fire department, said they can't get it out. They said, call Dr. Butts over at Old Westbury. They said, why? He said, because he can get money out of anybody. Sorrows now may weigh me down, disappointments all around. Sorrows come in mournful sighs, troubles through tear-filled eyes. But there is a place where pleasure reigns, and no mournful soul shall roam its plains. To that land of peace and glory, I hope to go someday. I do not know how long it will be, nor what the future holds for me. But this I know, if my God calls me, I will be free someday. I want you to know, dearly beloved, that the struggle continues. And our efforts to reach across racial and economic barriers, religious barriers, must continue. I have to tell you now, the number is greater than we think of people who really want to work and live together. But the evil that we confront is more powerful than you can ever imagine. Greed is a motivating force. And people will literally kill their own relatives. And so we must hold together. We must work together. And don't be so hard on each other. We'll make mistakes from time to time. We'll say things that we shouldn't say. But let us look beyond each other's faults and see the greater need. And don't get too comfortable. Be sensitive at all times. I saw this fellow, Marr, in his, it's not politically incorrect, they call it something else now. And real time. And he dared to use a negative term in the midst of laughter. It's all a joke. Humor is not a joke. You know that. We can't laugh at these things anymore. We just can't brush them aside. And that's why I'm so glad that I had the opportunity to know Amy Hagedorn, to work at the Islamic Center, to know Fred Brewington, but most importantly, to be here with Elaine tonight. God bless each and every one. Thank you very much.